Do you guys ever think about EMF radiation at all? If you listen to all the health influencers online like I do, you've probably heard of some sort of account or study about how EMF radiation coming from your phone or router is cooking your brain and turning you into a retarded piece of mush. So is it really that bad, guys, or do I really need to be afraid of my freaking smartphone now? And most importantly, is it just another modern day staple I need to be neurotic and paranoid about? Well, I researched this topic for hours and turns out that the situation is actually way worse than you actually thought. And this is what I want to talk about today. So, in case you don't know who I am, my name is Michael, and I like to share information on suppressed knowledge on alternative energy and health technologies that are largely hidden from the public. I spent the last couple years doing consulting work for various inventors and researchers specializing in disruptive Tesla based technologies. And the conclusion that I came across is that civilization as a whole is operating on less than half its potential, not because of lack of technology in possession today, but rather because of the engineered scarcity created by rogue elements of the government and powerful corporate interests. So if you guys are interested in this topic, give me a sub, give me a like, anything helps. But going back to the topic, nowadays we're starting to hear a lot about EMF radiation from a lot of the health-oriented channels on social, but I honestly feel that most people just don't understand the full breadth of what this is actually doing to the population.
The cell phones also produce electromagnetic radiation, which has been shown to do neurological damage to kids when it's around them all day, and to cause cellular damage and even cancers.
So the way I got into this topic is that I was talking to a friend one day, and he told me that he didn't like to put his phone close to his head. And when I asked him why, he said that he gets strange migraines and hears ring noises in his ear whenever he brings his phone close to his head. And so when I noticed that he would apply this weird sticker onto the back of the phone that would allegedly absorb the EMF radiation. He claimed that this is actually helping him. And I heard from various outlets at the time that keeping your phone in your pocket actually messes up your testosterone, lowers your sperm count, etc. And I was kind of surprised to hear about this device my friend was using because one, I was kind of curious to know whether it actually worked and actually did in fact lower the amount of EMF radiation being emitted, or if he was just being scammed for his money. I wasn't really even sure. So I was just curious, does this freaking thing actually work? So I did more research into this and realized that we are completely bathed in EMF radiation, not just from our phones, but from literally everything around us, from our Wi-Fi routers, our computers, overhead lights, appliances, pretty much everything. Hell, I would not even be surprised if your freaking house cat emitted some sort of radiation of some kind that was damaging your body. Who the heck knows nowadays, right? So first off, why does EMF exposure even matter? Up to the 20th century, the idea of electrical or magnetic or even energetic influences affecting human biology was seen as complete nonsense. And the paradigm at the time was that all biological processes in the body is entirely driven chemically and hormonally. However, that statement didn't age too well because according to Dr. Robert Becker, he did an extensive study into local mental institutes and saw that way more people were being admitted to these mental institutions during documented magnetic storms in the atmosphere versus when there were no documented magnetic storms. So it was very obvious that people were being heavily influenced by energetic fields coming from the planet's ionosphere to the point that it was causing them to check into these mental institutions. In addition, research done by a guy named Frank Brown found that a magnetic field presence heavily influenced human hormone production, cell cycle time, etc. In addition, Frederick Merkel showed that you can completely screw up a bird's seasonal migration patterns just by sticking a magnet onto its head. So the moment you stick the magnet onto its head, it has no idea where it's flying to. So what does all this tell us? I think it's pretty clear that not only do electromagnetic fields affect human biology, but they can also go as far as to even control it. So the big question now is what happens when electromagnetic influences are used against the people? So according to Dr. Robert Becker's early research, he showed that exposing people to fluctuating magnetic fields drastically lowered human response times in reaction tests. In addition, a Russian researcher did an experiment where rabbits were exposed to a 100 Gauss magnetic field, and he saw that brain cells actually started to die off, which sounds really dangerous. And in another study done on monkeys, the monkeys were exposed to a 200 Gauss magnetic field. This caused stress hormones to shoot off like cortisone, and this will lead to an eventual drop in the immune system, which would make the monkeys way more susceptible to all kinds of diseases like cancer, flu, etc. And they also found that strong magnetic fields can also collapse the blood-brain barrier, which is probably one of the worst case scenarios that can happen. in a situation like this. So I will mention that those previous studies did involve very strong magnetic fields that may not be so common in normal life. And so you may be thinking right now that you should be safe under normal everyday conditions like in your home, right? But this is actually wrong. Even very low level electric fields pulsed at extreme low frequencies can cause serious damage over time. And according to Robert Becker's research, I'm going to quote, in an experiment with rats, low electric fields at ELF level frequencies cause the rats to trigger slow stress responses through the production of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine without the rats being aware of it, as they would show no signs of agitation, illness, or fear. What this means that even relatively low levels of radiation can still do damage and affect your mental state and trigger the subliminal stress response. The wild thing is that the electric fields used simulate what you would normally see in a typical office setting, which is kind of scary. Magnetic or electrical frequencies have always been reported to create hyperactivity in rats and disturb sleep patterns, and this is likely the cause for the explosion in ADD-related cases among young kids. Also, in a study conducted by the Navy, they tested basic mental mathematics skills among individuals and found that test scores dropped drastically just in the presence of a one Gauss magnetic field. So again, it turns out that you're still not safe even in low-level fields of radiations. So in conclusion, based on the above, electromagnetic radiation exposure makes you dumber, burns your brain cells, triggers a subliminal stress response, which then leads to an immune system that is completely out of whack. So that's all really, really bad news.
The story really began when the Navy found out how to run submarines with nuclear power, how to arm them with nuclear missiles, and send them around the world to run silently, undetected. Is not a way to receive messages when they're hiding deep underwater. They have to run shallow and drag an antenna to do that. So the problem, oversimplified to be sure, is how do you keep our subs deep and undetected and still tell them to rise up and shoot if doomsday happens? Well, they've found a way. Sanguine or seafarer. From a land base, it would beam extremely low-frequency radio waves, ELF for short, to our submarines all over the world. Which brings us to the crunch, because to get a message way down here takes a ground antenna that is not your everyday variety of antenna.
The footage you just saw was of the US Navy's Project Seafarer back in 1975. There was a lot of public backlash against the Navy at the time as researchers like Dr. Becker started blowing the whistle on the risks of even low-level ELF frequencies. Here, Becker confirmed that even low-level field radiations found in most homes are still very dangerous. However, you want to keep in mind that this is 1975. Before cell towers, before Wi-Fi routers, or even 5G towers even existed. So all EMF threats outlined here will be like a gajillion times worse today, as the average person walking around in today's world is going to be like a radioactive zombie compared to a typical organic human that you would see in the 1970s. You can probably guess that this might be why most people today look way more sicker, fatter, uglier than their grandparents' generation. Kind of makes you wonder, huh? So not long after this disclosure, Becker's research funding was cut off by the Veterans Affairs Department, just as he was at the cusp of learning how to regenerate lost limbs through his groundbreaking research in electrotherapy, and soon forced into retirement, unfortunately. So why are governments and military failing so badly to protect the public against electromagnetic radiation? First of all, the lack of clear acknowledgement and reliable, non-biased research on the dangers of non-ionizing radiation is a major cause. The majority of research studies conducted by either military or telecom companies would suspiciously admit to no negative health effects at all. However, you want to keep in mind that nearly all studies conducted by independent third parties would clearly confirm biological damage resulting from radiation. So do you think this could be a conflict of interest? In my opinion, yes. Early on in 1953, the US government adopted what's called the Schwann Guideline, which set clear limits on how much RF radiation was considered safe. The Schwann limit for RF radiation, or radio frequency radiation, was set to 10 milliwatts per meter square as the safe limit. However, this really contrasted heavily with what the Soviet Union did, as the Soviets recognized that any type of radiation not found in nature would have some sort of effect on life, which is why they set their radiation standard to just a measly 10 microwatts. Today, the average iPhone emits radiation levels almost 9,000 times above the Schwann guideline when held against the body, and many more magnitudes above the Russian guidelines. You can probably guess that corporations absolutely hate these standards because any reasonably minded radiation standard would have sabotaged major initiatives from both military and major telecom companies wanting to deploy more radiation-emitting infrastructure. Because just imagine how much it would cost to have to install radiation-blocking barriers around power lines. That would probably get expensive really fast, right? So the truth is that electromagnetic fields are not necessarily all bad. As I taught by Robert Becker in my previous videos, he showed that controlled electrical currents can actually heal. Royal Raymond Rife created a device that could supposedly cure almost any disease by blasting resonant frequencies at the body. However, uncontrolled exposure can be risky. However, when EMFs are deliberately misused as a weapon, the results could be really disastrous. For example, the government has several available patents around transmitting remote frequencies to human brains to control thoughts, moods, or even cause injury. Now, I'm not going to go into that topic in too much detail now, as it is kind of a depressing topic, but I might cover it in a future video if you guys are interested. So this was Dr. Robert Becker's warning to the public on how every person on the planet is at risk of electromagnetic radiation exposure. If all the above mentioned is in fact true, then being able to control one's electromagnetic environment is one of the most powerful things you can do to influence health and our quality of life. The more we ignore this fact, the more we make ourselves vulnerable to being controlled by the establishment who already knows exactly what levers to pull, then make the public do exactly what it wants, like one of those marionette dolls. So what can you do now? The first obvious thing to do is avoid radiation whenever possible. Now, no duh, right? You probably guessed that one, right? I recommend that you try not to live right next to a 5G tower and do your best to not wear Bluetooth devices like those Apple AirPods, as they do fry your brain. I also recommend that you guys either replace your Wi-Fi router with a wired Ethernet connection, or you can use a router cage just to reduce the radiation density around your router, as that helps a lot. EMF blocking materials like shungite, Faraday fabrics can also be used to absorb or block dangerous radiation. And this is something I've been doing recently, but whenever I turn off my Wi-Fi router at night, I notice that I sleep a lot better. So that might be something you guys might want to do as well too. So anyway, that's it for today's video, guys. I hope you really enjoyed that. Like I said, I really want to do the best I can to share this information with as many people as possible out in the public. So please comment, subscribe. Anything helps, and it really does make a huge difference. So thanks again, guys. Love you. Take care.